The scent of my workshop is my favorite perfume. It's a complex blend of motor oil, warm metal, leather polish, and the faint, sharp tang of welding flux. It's the smell of potential, of history being brought back to life. My sanctuary, a sprawling, clean garage in the industrial outskirts of Monterey, was filled with the sleeping ghosts of automotive legends. In one bay, a 1967 Alfa Romeo 33 Stradale, its iconic red curves draped in a soft dust cover. In another, the bare chassis of a Porsche 904 waiting for me to work my magic. This was my world, a world of precision, passion, and tangible results. A world that made sense, the world outside, the one filled with small talk and dating apps, made considerably less sense. He seems nice. Ellie, my friend Maria, had said over the phone, her voice filled with the unearned optimism of a serial matchmaker. He's a real estate agent, very successful. Just be yourself. And for God's sake, don't talk about carburetors for the first 20 minutes. So here I was, attempting to be myself, which apparently meant leaving my sanctuary to have dinner with a man named Kyle Sterling. My first concession to the world of normal dating was agreeing to the date. My second was agreeing to pick him. Up, my third and most significant was deciding which car to take. I couldn't very well show up in the $500,000 Alpha that screamed the wrong message entirely. I needed something understated, something that was purely, authentically me. I walked over to the far corner of the workshop and pulled the cover off my personal project. My daily driver, my absolute pride and joy. It was a 1970 Lancia Fulvia Coupe 1.6 HF. To the uninitiated, it was a small, slightly boxy, unassuming little car. It didn't have the dramatic wings of a Countach or the muscular haunches of a Mustang. Its beauty was subtle, coated in its rally-bred history and its perfectly balanced proportions. The color was a deep, classic Lancia red. I had spent over 1,000 hours on its restoration. Every nut, every bolt, every stitch in the black vinyl interior was perfect. The 1.6-liter V4 engine, a masterpiece of Italian engineering, hummed with a life I understood intimately. To me, this car wasn't just a vehicle. It was a work of art, a testament to a time when driving was a raw, unfiltered experience. I wiped a non-existent speck of dust from its fender, a familiar sense of peace settling over me. Okay, girl, I murmured. Let's go see what the normal people are up to. I picked Kyle up from his condo complex, a new, soulless-looking development that advertised luxury living, but looked like it was made of cardboard and stucco. He was waiting out front, dressed in tight designer jeans, a blindingly white polo shirt with an oversized logo, and a watch that was far too large for his wrist. He was handsome in a generic, forgettable way, with perfectly coiffed hair that looked like it would shatter in a strong wind. He smiled as I pulled up, but the smile faltered as his eyes took in the Fulvia. He blinked, his gaze sweeping over its compact, classic lines with an expression of profound confusion. "Whoa," he said, sliding into the passenger seat and pulling the door shut with a solid, satisfying thunk. "This is retro. She's a 1970 Lancia Fulvia," I said, my voice pleasant, trying to adhere to Maria's no carburetors rule. "A Feneloni model, a Lancia," he said, drawing the word out as if he'd never heard it before. He ran a hand over the simple, clean dashboard. "My buddy in college had an old beat-up car like this. We used to have to push start it." He laughed, a loud, braying sound that seemed to rattle the small cabin. "So, is this like an ironic thing? Like how people wear vintage t-shirts?" My smile tightened a fraction of a degree. "No, it's not ironic. I restore classic cars for a living. This is one of mine." "Oh, right," he said, though his tone made it clear he wasn't impressed. "That's cool. A little hobby to keep you busy?" He tapped the side window. So this thing doesn't have like Bluetooth or anything, huh? My X5 syncs with my phone before I even get in. It's got this killer sound system, satellite radio, heated and cooled seats. You'd love it. For the entire 15-minute drive to the restaurant in Carmel by the Sea, he regaled me with the features of his leased BMW SUV. He talked about its horsepower, which he likely overstated. Its 0 to 60 time, which he likely didn't understand. And the size of its infotainment screen. He was like a child reciting a list of his Christmas presents. I just nodded along, my hands gripping the thin, wood-rimmed steering wheel of my Fulvia. The engine's responsive growl, a private conversation between me and the only other intelligent being in the car. The restaurant was exactly the kind of place I hated. It was loud, trendy, and ridiculously overpriced, with a valet stand out front that looked like a display case for a luxury car dealership. A row of gleaming Porsches, Maseratis, and brand new Mercedes shimmering under the lights. I pulled the little Lancia up behind a new boat-sized Bentley. The valet, a young kid with an appreciative eye, grinned. Whoa, a Feneloni. All original? As much as possible, I smiled back, a flicker of warmth in an otherwise freezing evening, but Kyle wasn't smiling. He was looking at my car, then at the lineup of German and modern Italian exotics, and his face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He was mortified. He leaned over to me as the valet opened my door, his voice a harsh, frantic whisper. Ellie, my God, you can't leave this thing here. It looks like a rust bucket next to everything else. That was it. That was the line. Rust bucket. He hadn't just insulted my car. He had insulted my work, my passion, my entire world. Let's just park it down the street or something. He continued, his voice rising in panic as he saw a few people from the restaurant's patio turn to look. Seriously, I'll call an Uber to take us back to it later. My treat, I can't be seen getting out of this thing. He laughed again, that same loud, obnoxious laugh, trying to play it off as a joke for the benefit of the valet and the onlookers. But his eyes were pleading, filled with the desperate terror of a social climber about to be exposed as someone who associated with a cheap car. The public humiliation was radiating off him in waves, but he was directing it all at me. A profound Arctic coldness washed over me. The hurt, the embarrassment, the anger, it all just vanished, replaced by a sudden, diamond-hard clarity. Maria was wrong. I shouldn't be myself. I shouldn't have come here. And I certainly shouldn't be spending another second with this shallow, ignorant, brand-obsessed mannequin. I looked at him, my expression perfectly neutral. I let him finish his frantic, whispered rant. Then I turned to the valet who was still holding my door. Actually, I said, my voice clear and carrying in the quiet evening air, there's been a change of plans. I slid back behind the wheel, my movements fluid and precise. I looked at Kyle, who was still standing there, half in and half out of the car. You're right, I said, my voice soft but cutting. We shouldn't be seen together. I gave him a smile that was all teeth. Have a wonderful dinner, Kyle. Before he could even process what was happening, I pulled the door shut, put the car in gear, and drove away from the curb, leaving him standing there, utterly bewildered in the shadow of the Bentley. The responsive engine roared to life as I accelerated down the street, the sound a symphony of defiance. The 15-minute drive back to my workshop was a blur. The humiliation of the moment replayed in my mind, a hot, bitter sting. He hadn't just disliked my car. He had been repulsed. By it, ashamed of it, and by extension, ashamed of me. He had judged the book by its cover and found it wanting dot by the time I pulled back into my workshop. The hurt had begun to cool and harden. I parked the Lancia in its spot under the bright, honest lights of the garage. I got out and ran a hand. Over its fender, its classic lines so full of character and history. It was not a rust bucket, it was a legend. And he was an idiot. A loud, ignorant, and profoundly superficial idiot. The anger was no longer hot and messy. It was becoming cold, focused, architectural. A plan was beginning to form in my mind, a beautiful, intricate machine of a plan. He wanted to live in a world of price tags and public perception. Fine, I would give him exactly what he wanted. I would show him a price tag he could never have imagined, and I would orchestrate a public perception that would leave him utterly, deservedly ruined. I looked at my beautiful, misunderstood car. "Don't you worry, girl," I whispered to the empty garage. "He'll learn your name. I'll make sure of it." The workshop was silent the next morning, save for the low hum of the fluorescent lights. The California sun hadn't yet burned through. The coastal fog and the cool gray light that filtered through the high windows gave the space a monastic feel. I stood before the Lancia, not with the hurt and humiliation of the previous night, but with the cold, dispassionate eye of a forensic investigator examining a piece of evidence. The car was perfect, the insult had been profound. The two facts were incompatible. One of them had to give. I didn't rage. I didn't throw things. My anger was never loud. It was a low, steady, blue-hot flame. I channeled it the only way I knew how, through work. I spent the first hour of the morning meticulously cleaning the Fulvia's twin carburetors. My hands, steady and sure, worked with practice ease, disassembling, cleaning, and recalibrating the delicate Italian machinery. It was a meditative act, the familiar mechanics a balm to my bruised ego. With every perfectly tensioned screw, every precisely adjusted float, I felt the messy, emotional chaos of Kyle Sterling's insult being converted into pure, high-octane focus. He had called my art a rust bucket. I would respond not with insults, but with a flawless demonstration of its power and value. My phone buzzed on the workbench, startling me from my concentration. The screen read Maria. I sighed, wiping my hands on a clean rag before answering. I knew this call was coming. "Ellie." "Oh my God, I am so sorry," she began without even a hello. "Kyle just texted me. He said you just drove off." "What happened?" "He made it sound like you were crazy. He called my Fenelon a cheap rest bucket in front of the valet at Casanova." I said, my voice flat. There was a moment of horrified silence on the other end of the line. Maria knew my cars. She knew what that Lancia meant to me. "He what?" "Oh, that asshole. That superficial, brand-obsessed moron." "Ellie, I am never setting you up again. I am so sorry." "It's not your fault, Maria. You thought he was a normal human being." "It was an honest mistake." "No, but I should have known," she lamented. "He's just been so stressed lately, trying to land this huge client. That's all he talks about. He's probably just taking it out on everyone. A client?" I asked, a flicker of something clinical and curious cutting through my anger. "Yeah, some big-shot investor from San Francisco," she said, her voice a rush of apologetic gossip. "Alistair Finch. Kyle's been working for months to get him to sign on for some big commercial real estate deal. He said the guy is impossible to impress. Apparently, he's a huge car nut, collects old Porsches or something." Kyle probably felt insecure showing up with, well, he's an idiot. I froze, my hand still holding the rag. The name echoed in my mind. Alistair Finch. I knew that name. He wasn't just some big-shot investor. Alistair Finch was a legend in the collecting world. He was a notoriously private, incredibly discerning enthusiast with one of the finest collections of post-war European sports cars on the West Coast. And his particular passion wasn't just Porsches. It was for rare, all-original, rally-proven Italian marques. Marques like Lancia. The universe, it seemed, had a wonderful, wicked sense of humor. the messy, emotional anger I felt toward Kyle. Sterling suddenly felt pedestrian, inefficient. A new feeling was replacing it, the sharp, exhilarating thrill of a perfect strategy clicking into place. The pieces were all there on the board, the arrogant fool, the knowledgeable, high-stakes target he was trying to impress, the perfect, misunderstood bait, and the most prestigious, high-profile stage in the automotive world, an event that brought collectors like Alistair Finch out of the woodwork every single year. Monterey Car Week. Ellie, are you there? Maria's voice pulled me back from my thoughts. I'm here, I said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. Don't worry about it, Maria. Honestly, you've actually been a huge help. I have? She asked, confused. You have, I said, looking at the Fulvia, which seemed to gleam with a new, predatory light under the workshop lamps. You've given me a wonderful idea for a new project. After I hung up, I walked to my office. At the back of the workshop, the plan that had been a vague notion of revenge now had a clear, defined objective. It wasn't just about proving my car was valuable. It was about staging a demonstration so precise, so public, and so perfectly targeted that it would not only humiliate Kyle Sterling, but professionally incinerate him in front of the one man he desperately needed to impress. My first step was research. I spent the next 2 hours doing a deep dive on Alistair Finch. I read old articles from classic car magazines, scoured auction results, and sifted through forum posts from fellow enthusiasts. Just as I suspected, his collection was legendary. He valued originality above all else. He despised over-restored, flashy trailer queens. He loved cars with a story, with a patina, with a soul. My Lancia, a true survivor car with its original paint and documented history, was not just a car he would like. It was a car he would covet. The second step was securing the stage. Monterey Car Week was only a month away. Getting a car consigned to the headline RM Sotheby's auction this late in the game was next to impossible. The catalog was usually locked in months in advance. But I wasn't just any consignor. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It was my contact at the auction house, a sharp, fast-talking man named David, Ellie Vance. He answered, his voice warm and familiar. To what do I owe the pleasure? Calling to buy that Mira you've been chasing, or are you finally ready to part with one of your own jewels? The second one, actually, David, I said. He was silent for a beat. You're kidding. Which one? A 1970 Lancia Fulvia 1.6H FN alone, I said. All original, numbers matching, documented rally history, a true survivor. I could practically hear his jaw drop. You're serious? Ellie, the catalog for Monterey is closed. We've already gone to print. I know, I said calmly, but imagine the buzz you could generate. A last-minute surprise consignment. A true barn find condition. Fenelone, one of the most sought-after Italian rally cars, appearing on the biggest stage. Collectors will lose their minds. Alistair Finch will be there. You know how he feels about original Lancias? I let the name hang in the air. David was a master showman. He understood the theater of the auction. A surprise like this wasn't a problem. It was an opportunity. Let me make some calls, he said, his voice now electric with excitement. Send me the portfolio on the car. If it's as good as you say it is, I think I can make a spot for you. We'll bill it as a late, legendary edition. The final step was crafting the narrative. I spent the rest of the afternoon compiling the portfolio for David. I took professional quality photos of the Lancia, highlighting not just its beauty, but its authenticity. I documented every scrape and stone chip, every quirk of its history. I wrote the description for the auction catalog myself, a piece of prose that was part technical specification, part love letter. I didn't just describe a car. I told its story. I was building its legend. By the end of the day, my work was done. The trap was meticulously designed. Kyle, in his blissful ignorance, would be drawn to the auction by the presence of Alistair Finch, the man he so desperately wanted as a client. Finch, a true connoisseur, would be drawn there by the rumors of a rare original Lancia, and I would be there to watch the two of them collide. Late that night, an email from David arrived. It was a single sentence: "You're in." The legend is officially on the blog. Attached was a proof of the digital addendum to the auction catalog. There it was. A full-page spread featuring a stunning photograph of my car. My cheap rust bucket. It looked like a priceless artifact in a museum. And underneath it, the description: Lot 242, 1970 Lancia Fulvia Coupe 1.6 HF, Fenelon. Consigned by renowned restorer Ellie Vance. I leaned back in my chair, a cold, satisfied smile on my face. The first phase of the project was complete. The invitations to Kyle Sterling's professional immolation had just been sent out, and the price of admission would be his own foolish, arrogant pride. The week before the auction, Monterey transforms. The usual sleepy, coastal charm is replaced by a low, constant rumble. The air, normally thick with salt spray and the scent of pine, now carries the rich, unburnt perfume of high-octane fuel. Every hotel parking lot becomes an impromptu, exotic car show. The streets are a living museum filled with priceless Ferraris, Jaguars, and Bugattis. It's a week of pure, unadulterated automotive worship. For me, it's the holiest week of the year. This year, it was also my hunting ground. My first move was to seed the ground. The key to a successful auction is buzz. I needed the right people, the serious collectors, the obsessive enthusiasts, the people like Alistair Finch, to be not just aware of my Lancia, but actively intrigued by it before it ever hit the block. I sat at my laptop late one night, a new anonymous email account open on the screen. I composed a short, cryptic message to a writer I knew at Petrolicious, one of the most respected classic car blogs. Subject: heard a rumor about the Monterey auction. To whom it may concern. A friend who works logistics for RM. Sotheby's told me about a last-minute consignment that won't be in the main print catalog. A 70 Lancia Fulvia Fenelon. Said it's a completely original, unrestored survivor with some kind of Italian rally history. A true ghost. You might want to look into it. Just a tip. I signed it simply a friend, and I hit send. It took less than 24 hours. The blog post went live with a headline that made my heart sing. Is a mythical survivor Lancia Fenelon a surprise addition to the Monterey auction? The post was speculative, quoting anonymous sources, but it had the exact right effect. The comment section exploded. Enthusiasts debated its potential chassis number. Collectors bragged about having seen one in Italy years ago. People argued over its potential value. The buzz was real. The hook was set. I had created a myth. Soon, I would provide the monster. The next part of my plan required me to leave the comfort of my workshop and venture into the heart of the social scene. On Friday, I went to The Quail, a motorsports gathering. It's less of a car show and more of a lavish garden party for the 1%, set on the impossibly green lawns of a golf club in Caramel Valley. The price of a single ticket could buy a decent used car. The grass was dotted with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of automotive history. I wasn't there to see the cars. I was there to see one man. I knew from my research that Alistair Finch never missed the Quail. I also knew he had a particular weakness for the zagato-bodied alphas of the 1960s. I dressed carefully, not in a fancy dress, but in well-fitting linen trousers, a silk blouse, and comfortable but elegant leather loafers. I wanted to look like I belonged, but not like I was trying too hard. I found the Alfa Romeo display, and lingered by a breathtakingly beautiful 1965 TZ2, its low, aerodynamic red body a thing of pure aggression and grace. I simply stood there, admiring its lines, waiting. After about 10 minutes, he appeared. Alistair Finch was a man in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair, a deeply tanned face, and intelligent, piercing blue eyes. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored blue blazer and a look of deep, scholarly concentration as he approached the Alpha. I let him circle the car once before I spoke. "It's amazing, isn't it?" I said, my voice quiet, almost to myself. The way Zagato managed to make the aluminum bodywork look both brutal and delicate at the same time. He turned to me, his initial expression one of polite dismissal, but it softened when he saw the genuine appreciation in my eyes. "You know your Alphas," he stated, his voice a gravelly baritone. "I know what I love," I replied with a smile. "And?" "I love cars that were built with a singular purpose." The TZ2 was built to win races. You can feel it just standing next to it. It's not just a pretty face. We fell into a conversation that was, for me, as natural as breathing. We didn't talk about money or business. We talked about cars. We talked about the genius of Vittorio Giano, the madness of the Nomiglia, the philosophical difference between restoring a car and preserving it. He was sharp, knowledgeable, and completely without pretension when it came to his passion. For 20 minutes, I forgot all about Kyle Sterling and my plan for revenge. I was just an enthusiast talking to a fellow believer. "You have a good eye, young lady," he said finally, shaking my hand. His grip was firm. "It's rare to find someone your age with a true appreciation for originality. Most collectors these days just want shiny new paint. Shiny paint hides the car's soul," I said. "The stone chips and the small imperfections are part of its story." He nodded, a look of deep respect in his eyes. "Well said. It was a pleasure to meet you, Miss Vance," I said. "Eleanor Vance." "Alistair Finch. I hope we run into each other again." He gave a final, appreciative look at the Alpha, then at me, and walked on. I stayed by the car, my heart beating fast. The second hook was set. I had established myself in his mind, not as a seller or a business associate, but as a knowledgeable peer. He would remember me. Now it was time to reel in my primary target. That evening, I called David at the auction house. "Ellie, the buzz around your Lancia is incredible," he said excitedly. "People are calling it the Ghost Fulvia. You've created a masterpiece of marketing." "Glad to hear it," I said coolly. "Listen, David, I have a small favor to ask. I was thinking this auction is a prime networking event. You should try to get more of the local business community involved. Maybe some of the high-end real estate firms." "Like who?" he asked. "There's one called Sterling and Associates," I said, my voice a model of casual indifference. "They're fairly new, trying to make a name for themselves. I hear they have some clients with deep pockets. You should send their senior partners a couple of VIP tickets. Tell them it's a special invitation. It would be a good gesture, and you never know who they might bring." "That's a great idea, Ellie," David said, ever the showman. "Consider it. Done. The more whales in the room, the better." I hung up the phone, a cold, clean feeling of satisfaction washing over me. The trap was now baited and set. Kyle would receive a surprise, ego-stroking invitation to the most exclusive event of the year. He would see it as the ultimate opportunity to suck up to Alistair Finch, the car-loving investor he so desperately needed. He would think it was his own cleverness, his own rising star, that had provided the opportunity. He would walk into that auction hall feeling like the king of the world, completely unaware that he was just a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. The night of the auction arrived. The air was cool and crisp. I stood before the full-length mirror in my hotel room. I had chosen my armor for the evening with care. A simple, beautifully cut black dress that was elegant but allowed for movement. No flashy jewelry. My only accessory was a vintage Shure Atavia chronograph on my wrist, a classic racing watch that only a true enthusiast would recognize. I looked at my reflection. My eyes were clear, my expression calm. There was no trace of the humiliated woman who had driven away from that restaurant a month ago. She was gone. In her place was a woman who was in complete control. A woman heading not to a party, but to a demolition. My demolition. Kyle thought he had judged me and found me lacking. Tonight he would be judged by a jury of his wealthiest peers, and the verdict, I knew, would be devastating. The auction pavilion was a cathedral of capitalism. A vast, temporary structure erected for Monterey Car Week. It buzzed with an electric, high-stakes energy. On one side, a row of phone bank operators sat poised, ready to channel bids from unseen oligarchs and sheiks around the globe. In the center, a massive, rotating stage was bathed in brilliant white light, awaiting the next four-wheeled deity to be offered up for sacrifice. The air was a heady mix of champagne, adrenaline, and the faint, intoxicating smell of old leather and rich exhaust fumes. I found a discreet, shadowy spot on a raised platform reserved for consignors, a perfect vantage point to watch the grand theater I had set into motion. I scanned the crowd, a sea of wealthy, tanned faces and expensive watches, and then I saw them. They were seated 5 rows from the front prime territory. Alistair Finch looked focused and scholarly, his auction catalog open on his lap. And next to him was Kyle Sterling Dodd. He was practically vibrating with self-importance. Dressed in a shiny suit that was trying too hard, he was leaning in close to Finch, pointing at the stage, speaking with an air of authority he had no right to possess. He was playing the part of the seasoned insider, the knowledgeable guide in this exclusive world. He looked like a child wearing his father's suit. He caught my eye from across the room, and a slow, smug smirk spread across his face. It was a look of pure pity, the look a man in the VIP section gives to someone he assumes is in the nosebleeds. "See what you're missing?" His expression screamed, "This is my world, not yours." He gave me a tiny, condescending nod and then turned back to his client, dismissing me completely. I felt a ghost of the old sting, but it vanished instantly. It was the last time he would ever look at me that way. I simply smiled to myself and settled in to watch the show. The auction progressed with a steady, heart-pounding rhythm. A 1955 Mercedes-Benz 300 cell Gullwing sold for $1.8 million. A 1967 Ferrari 275 GT B4 hammered for just under $3 million. Each sale was a burst of applause and frantic energy. With each escalating price, I could see Kyle's eyes grow wider, his performance for Finch becoming more animated. He was soaking in the ambient wealth, completely oblivious. Then, the auctioneer, a man with a smooth, hypnotic British accent, paused. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice dropping conspiratorially, "we have a very special late addition to our catalog. A vehicle that has the entire collecting community buzzing. Please direct your attention to the screen for a short presentation on lot 242. The giant screens flickered to life. My film began to play a beautifully shot sequence of the Lancia, starting with close-ups of its original Scrabble tile number plates, the slight patina on the door handles, the honest wear on the driver's seat. My voice, recorded in a calm, steady narrative, explained the car's history. I saw Kyle's face on the screen's reflection. The smug look was replaced by one of profound confusion. He was looking at the car from our disastrous date. He nudged Finch, a puzzled look on his face, as if to say, "Can you believe they let this piece of junk in here?" But Alistair Finch was not confused. He leaned forward, his body rigid, his eyes locked on the screen. He was utterly captivated. Then the car itself rolled onto the stage. Under the intense, multi-million-dollar lighting, my rust bucket looked magnificent. Its compact, purposeful lines radiated an authenticity that made the glossy, over-restored cars before it looked like cheap toys. It had soul. The room, which had been buzzing loudly, quieted to a reverent hush. The real collectors knew exactly what they were looking at. "What we have here," the auctioneer continued, his voice now filled with reverence, "is a 1970 Lancia Fulvia Coupe 1.6 HF Fenelon, one of only 1,258 ever built. This is the legendary big headlight model that dominated the rally scene, and this example, this is the Holy Grail. It is a completely original, unrestored survivor car with full documented history from its first owner in Turin. This is not a restoration. This is a time capsule." The bidding began. "We will start the bidding at $100,000, the auctioneer said. Kyle choked on his champagne. I saw the liquid spray from his mouth. His head whipped around, his eyes scanning the crowd in disbelief. $100,000? For the cheap car? It had to be a joke. $100,000 on the phone. A bid spotter yelled, $125,000 in the room. $150,000 on my left. $175,000 on the phone. It wasn't a slow climb. It was an explosion. The price leaped in $25,000 increments. Alistair Finch raised his paddle. $200,000. He called out, his voice firm. Kyle looked at his client as if he had lost his mind. His face was a perfect portrait of cognitive dissonance. The world as he knew it was shattering in real time. $225,000 on the phone. $250,000 from the gentleman in the back. Finch bid again. $275,000. As the price soared past $250,000, the camera operator found me in the consignor's area. My face, calm and composed, appeared on the giant screens next to a live feed of the Lancia. The auctioneer gestured towards me. And let us not forget the consignor, the renowned restorer, Miss Ellie Vance, who has been the faithful custodian of this remarkable machine. I watched Kyle's eyes track from the car to the unbelievable price on the tote board and finally to my face on the giant screen. The smugness, the confusion. It all melted away, replaced by a wave of pure, sickening horror. His face went completely white, as if all the blood had drained from it. The color, the sound, the reality of the situation crashed down on him all at once. The girl with the cheap car, the owner of the priceless artifact, the expert whose passion he had mocked. They were the same person. He had sat in that very car next to me and called it a piece of junk. And he had done it all while trying to impress Alistair Finch, a man who is now desperately trying to buy that very car. Finch was outbid on the phone at $300,000. He lowered his paddle, frustrated but respectful of the price. The final call came. Sold for $300,000. The gavel cracked like a rifle shot, echoing through the pavilion. The crowd erupted in applause. The Lancia, my little Fenelon, had just sold for more than twice the value of Kyle's house. In the midst of the applause, I watched the final brutal act of my play unfold. Alistair Finch slowly turned to Kyle. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. His voice was low, cold, and utterly lethal. I was too far away to hear the words, but I could read the expression on his face. I could see Kyle recoil as if he had been physically slapped up. Finch spoke for no more than 10 seconds. Then he stood up, gave Kyle one last look of pure, dismissive contempt, and walked away, leaving Kyle sitting there alone, a ghost in a shiny suit, his career and social ambitions utterly decimated. He had been weighed, measured, and found wanting, in the most public way imaginable, by the one person whose opinion mattered to him. I stayed in my spot, watching him. He looked small, pathetic, and completely lost. He finally looked up, his terrified eyes scanning the crowd until they found mine. He stared at me, his expression a silent scream of disbelief and ruin. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I simply met. His gaze held it for a long, silent moment, and then took a slow, deliberate sip of the complimentary mineral water I'd been holding. The confrontation was over. My point had been made, not with angry words, but with a price tag and a falling gavel. And the silence of my victory was the most satisfying sound in the world. The day after the auction, the Monterey Peninsula was shrouded in a thick, contemplative fog. The manic energy of the week had peaked and broken, and now a quiet exhaustion settled over the town as collectors packed up their treasures and prepared to return to the real world. For me, the real world was waiting in the quiet, climate-controlled back office of the RM Sotheby's Pavilion. David, my contact at the auction house, greeted me with a hug and a grin that was equal parts awe and terror. "Ellie Vance, you are my new hero," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. I have never, in 20 years of doing this, seen a car cause that much drama. The blogs are calling it the humiliation on the half mile. Alistair Finch is telling everyone the story. You didn't just sell a car last night. You created a legend. That was the general idea, I said with a small smile. Speaking of which, he said, leading me to a desk piled with paperwork. The winning bidder, a Mr. Dubois from Luxembourg. He's already wired the funds. We just need you to sign the title transfer. I looked at the paperwork. The name, Jean-Paul Dubois, was indeed listed as the buyer. Jean-Paul was a dear friend, a fellow enthusiast, and a man who owed me a significant favor after I'd located a rare gearbox for his Bugatti Type 57. Actually, David, I said, pushing the papers back across the desk, there's been a slight change. Mr. Dubois will be retracting his bid. And per our consignment agreement, I'll be exercising my right as the seller to place a protective bid and buy the car back myself. Minus the house commission, of course. David stared at me, his mouth slowly falling open as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. You never intended to sell it at all, did you? The whole thing, the surprise consignment, the buzz, the auction, it was all a stage. The car was never for sale, I confirmed. But its valuation, that was very much for sale. And I believe it sold for a very satisfactory price. He just shook his head, a slow laugh building in his chest. Ellie, you are the most brilliantly terrifying woman I have ever met. I'm buying you lunch. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. My phone, which usually only buzzed with calls from parts suppliers and clients, began to melt down. I got calls from Motor Trend and Classic and Sports Car Magazine, both, wanting to do a feature on my workshop. The organizers of the Concorso d'Eleganza Villa d'Este in Italy emailed me, inviting me to display the Lancia there next year. I had become, overnight, a minor celebrity in a world that rarely creates them. My story had a narrative they loved, the quiet, underestimated expert who, with a single brilliant move, put a loudmouth fraud in his place. I was the hero of every gearhead who had ever been looked down on for loving an old, obscure car. Shrapnel from my meticulously planned explosion eventually found its way to me. 2 days after the auction, I received a long, rambling text message. It was from Kyle. Hey, Ellie, it's Kyle. Listen, I know things got off on the wrong foot the other night. I was just really stressed with this Finch deal, and I was trying to be funny, you know? I had no idea about your car. It's really cool. Super cool. Anyway, what happened at the auction was a huge misunderstanding. Finch totally overreacted. I was wondering maybe you could just call him and explain. that it was all just a big joke. It would really help me out. Let me know. I read the message twice. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of his own breathtaking ignorance or the public way he had shamed me. It was all still about him, about his deal, about his problems. He still didn't get it. He never would. I held my finger down on his message. The options popped up. Reply. Forward. Delete. I pressed. Delete. Then I blocked his number. He was a piece of bad code I had successfully purged from my system. He was no longer worth a single thought. The call from Maria came later that day. Oh my God, Ellie. She screamed into the phone. I heard. What you did. It's all over town. You put the Lancia in the auction and bankrupted Kyle Sterling's entire life. You are a legend, a stone-cold, badass legend. I am so sorry I ever made you go out with that human boat shoe. I laughed, a genuine bubbling laugh that felt like a release. It's okay, Maria. You can set me up again in about 10 years. Deal, she said. But next time, I'm finding you a nice, quiet librarian who's terrified of cars. We talked for another 20 minutes, dissecting every delicious karmic detail of Kyle's public demise. Talking with her, laughing about the absurdity of it all, felt like the final step in washing the entire unpleasant experience away. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was a very funny story. That evening, I did what I had been longing to do all week. I went to my workshop, the quiet hum of the place welcoming me home. I walked over to the Lancia. My girl, she was back where she belonged. I ran my hand over her roofline, a silent thank you for being the perfect accomplice. I didn't need to check the fluids or tinker with the engine. I knew she was perfect. I opened the door, slid into the familiar driver's seat, and turned the key. The little V4 engine roared to life, its energetic, rasping sound filling the garage. I pulled out of the workshop and onto the empty road, heading for the coast. I drove through Carmel and onto the 17-mile drive, the toll taker waving me through. With a starstruck look on his face, the sun was setting over the Pacific, casting a brilliant golden light across the ocean. The gnarled cypress trees were silhouetted against the fiery sky. I rolled down the window, the cool, salty air whipping through my hair. I wasn't thinking about Kyle. I wasn't thinking about the auction or the money or my newfound fame. I was just thinking about the road, the feel of the wooden steering wheel. In my hands, the perfect way the car downshifted into a corner, the glorious sound of the engine opening up on a straightaway dot. This was my world. It was a world of substance, of history, of passion you could feel in your hands and in your gut. It wasn't about shiny surfaces or brand names. It was about the soul of the machine. I had been foolish to think I needed to leave this world to find happiness. I had defended my world, and in doing so, I had found myself again. I smiled, a real unburdened smile. I was not a victim. I was not a vengeful goddess. I was just Ellie, a woman who loved old cars. And I was exactly where I was, supposed to be on a beautiful, winding road, in a car that understood me perfectly, driving into a sunset of my own making. The seasons turned on the Monterey Peninsula. The autumn fog gave way to the crisp, clear air of a California winter. The tourists thinned out, and the wealthy part-timers retreated to their desert homes, leaving the coast to the locals and the sea lions. The echoes of my dramatic auction week faded from loud headlines into a quiet, respected legend within the car community. I was no longer a news item. I had become part of the local lore. My life returned to a peaceful, productive rhythm centered around the familiar, comforting smells and sounds of my workshop. The revenge, once a burning obsession, now felt like a distant, slightly surreal memory. I had proven my point so thoroughly that it no longer required any thought. Kyle Sterling had vanished from my life as completely as if he'd never existed. Maria told me he had lost the Finch deal, and his professional reputation had taken such a hit that he'd ended up leaving his firm. He was someone else's problem now. My focus was back where it belonged, on the metal, the engines, the stories held within the worn leather of a driver's seat. I was working on the Porsche 904, meticulously recreating a wiring loom from scratch, a task that required the patience of a saint and the precision of a surgeon. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the only sounds the soft jazz playing on my radio and the precise click of my wire strippers. The big roll-up door to the workshop was open, letting in the cool, salty air. A shadow fell across my workbench. I looked up, expecting to see a delivery driver or perhaps a client stopping by. Instead, my heart gave a single hard thump against my ribs. Leaning against the doorframe, silhouetted by the bright afternoon sun, was Alistair Finch. He was dressed far more casually than he had been at the Quail, in a simple cashmere sweater and worn corduroy trousers, but he still radiated an aura of quiet, immense authority. He wasn't looking at me, but at the immaculate, half-finished chassis of the Porsche. "A 904 Carrera GTS, he said, his gravelly voice filling the quiet space. The Holy Grail. You don't see many of them outside of a museum, especially not in this state of disassembly." I slowly put my tools down, wiping my hands on a rag. The surprise of his visit was profound. He was a man who commanded audiences, who moved in circles I couldn't even imagine. For him to show up at my workshop, unannounced, was unheard of. "Mr. Finch," I said, my voice steady, "this is an unexpected surprise." He finally turned his gaze to me, a small, genuine smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Please call me Alistair, and I apologize for dropping in." I was driving down the coast and found myself thinking about our conversation at the Quail, about originality, about soul. He gestured around my workshop at the organized rows of tools, the framed engineering blueprints on the wall, the silent, beautiful shells of cars waiting for my touch. I wanted to see the place where that philosophy comes to life. This was not a social call. This was an inspection. He was here to see if the knowledgeable young woman he'd met was the real deal. He walked slowly into the workshop, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes taking in every detail. He peered at the engine block of the Alfa Romeo 33 Stradale. He ran a gentle finger over the flawless bodywork of the Lancia, and he stopped in front of the Porsche. "This is a magnificent project," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "Most restorers would have stripped the chassis and powder-coated it to a mirror shine. But you've preserved the original factory welds, the chalk marks from the assembly line. You're saving its history, not erasing it." "Shiny paint hides the car's soul." I repeated the words I had said to him weeks ago. "Indeed it does," he said, turning to face me fully. "That Lancia at the auction, it was a masterpiece of preservation and your little performance. That was a masterpiece of a different sort." I felt a slight flush of heat in my cheeks. "I'm not sure what you mean." He chuckled, a dry, knowing sound. "Please, Eleanor, I may be old, but I'm not senile." I saw the look on that young real estate broker's face. I saw the look on yours. I put the pieces together. He made the fatal error of judging a book by its cover, and you calmly, elegantly, and very publicly showed him the price of the first edition. It was the most entertaining piece of theater I've seen in years. He wasn't mocking me. He was congratulating me. He saw my revenge not as a petty, emotional act, but as a clever, strategic move worthy of a master tactician. He appreciated the artistry of it. He was an idiot, was all I said. "The world is full of them," Alistair agreed. "They're drawn to wealth, but they don't understand value. That is why I'm here. I am in need of someone who understands value, someone I can trust. He walked over to my workbench, picking up a small, intricate piece of the Porsche's engine. I have a car in my collection, a car that is very important to me. It's the Alfa Romeo TZ2 we admired at the Quail. My breath caught in my throat. It's a perfect car, he continued, but it has a ghost. A flaw in the engine that no one has been able to diagnose. It runs beautifully for 20 minutes, and then it just dies. I've had the best mechanics in Europe look at it. They all want to tear it down and replace everything with modern parts. They want to erase its soul. He put the piece down and looked me straight in the eye. His gaze was intense, serious. I don't want to do that. I want someone to find the ghost, to understand the problem, to fix it with respect for what the car is. I want you to do it, Eleanor. The offer hung in the air between us. It wasn't just a job. It was a commission of immense trust. He was offering me the keys to one of the most priceless and significant cars in his collection. It was a challenge, a puzzle, and the highest possible compliment he could pay me. The validation I had tried to get from a fool like Kyle Sterling was being handed to me freely by a man who was the king of the world I truly cared about. The anger and humiliation that had started this entire affair felt like a memory from another lifetime. It had been the catalyst, the spark, but the fire it had lit had forged something new. This moment, this offer, was not the result of my revenge. It was the result of my work, my passion, my knowledge. The very things Kyle had mocked. I looked at Alistair Finch, a man of substance, of taste, of genuine passion, and I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. I had started this journey trying to find a place for myself in the normal world, but by winning a war on my own terms, I had discovered my world was better, and now its most respected citizen was inviting me to take a seat at the head of the table. A slow, confident smile spread across my face, a real one. "When can you have it delivered, Alistair?" I asked. 1 year later, the world was different. The legend of the auction had settled into a quiet, foundational part of my identity in the automotive community, a story told by others that I no longer had to think about. Kyle Sterling was a footnote in a story that had become far more interesting. My life was no longer defined by my reaction to him, but by the work that his foolishness had inadvertently brought me. My life was now defined by the ghost. The ghost lived in the heart of Alistair Finch's 1965 Alfa Romeo. TZ2. The car sat in the main bay of my workshop, its exquisite Zagato-penned bodywork a thing of almost painful beauty. For the past 6 months, it had been my obsession, my tormentor, and my greatest professional challenge. Alistair had been true to his word. The car had been delivered on a climate-controlled, enclosed transporter, and with it, a simple, one-page contract that gave me complete authority over its restoration and a budget that made my eyes water. His only instruction was, find the ghost, Eleanor, and do not harm the soul. The ghost was a maddeningly precise mechanical phantom. The car would start perfectly. It would idle with the throaty, aggressive burble unique to a twin-cam Alpha engine. From its golden era, it would drive for exactly 22 minutes, like a dream. The power was glorious, the handling sublime. And then, at the 22-minute mark, as if a switch had been flipped, the engine would cough once, sputter, and die completely, and it would refuse to restart. If you let it sit for an hour, it would cool down and start again, ready to repeat the exact same heartbreaking performance. Alistair, true to his nature as a connoisseur, became less of a client and more of a fellow investigator. He would fly down from San Francisco once a week and spend the day in the workshop, observing my process with a quiet, intense curiosity. Team in Germany was convinced it was vapor lock, he said one afternoon, peering at the pristine fuel lines I had laid out on a clean cloth. They replaced the entire fuel system. Pumps, filters, lines, everything. It made no difference. 22 minutes. It's not vapor lock, I said, shaking my head as I wiped my hands. The fuel pressure is perfectly consistent right up until the moment of failure. I've hooked up 3 different gauges. The bowls on the Webers are full when it dies. It isn't starved of fuel, so we moved on. The next week was dedicated to the ignition. I suspected a coil was overheating and failing when it reached a certain temperature. It was a classic symptom. I replaced the vintage Morelli coils with a new perfectly matched set. We started the engine, let it warm up, and then took it for a test drive on a private circuit Alistair had rented for us. The car screamed down the main straight. It felt perfect. My heart soared. For 21 glorious minutes, I thought I had beaten it. Then, halfway through a sweeping right-hand turn on the 22nd minute, the engine died. The sudden silence was deafening, replaced only by the sound of the tires skidding on the asphalt. The process became a meticulous, frustrating litany of dead ends. I checked the valve clearances, cold and hot. Perfect. I scoped the cylinders. Perfect. I pulled the distributor apart, checking the weights, the springs, the condenser. All within factory specification. Alistair never showed a flicker of impatience. He would just watch, ask intelligent questions, and talk about the men who had designed the car. "Do you know what TZ stands for, Eleanor?" he asked me. One day, as I was painstakingly checking the electrical resistance of every wire in the loom, "Kobler Zagato," I replied without looking up. "A tubular space frame with a body by the artist Ed Zagato?" "Precisely," he said. "It was designed by a team of absolute fanatics at Auto Delta, Alpha's racing division. Men like Carlo Chiti. They weren't just engineers. They were warlocks. They pushed the boundaries of what was possible with the technology of the day. They used exotic alloys, they bent the rules. They created solutions that no sane production line engineer would ever attempt. The answer to this problem isn't in a standard mechanic's manual. It's in the mind of a madman like Chidi." His words stuck with me. I was thinking like a modern mechanic, using modern diagnostics to solve a problem with a vintage, almost bespoke racing machine. I was looking for a logical flaw. I needed to start looking for a piece of flawed genius. That night, I went home and pulled out my personal library of automotive books. I didn't look in the repair manuals. I went to my collection of rare, out-of-print Italian books from the period biographies of designers, histories of Auto Delta, old race programs from Targa Florio and Le Mans. I was looking for a ghost story. For hours, I read, surrounded by the smell of old paper and aging ink. I read about the legendary wins, the catastrophic failures, the brilliant, unorthodox engineering solutions. And then, in a dusty, leather-bound history of Italian racing electronics, I found it. It wasn't a chapter heading. It wasn't even a full paragraph. It was a single sentence and a footnote at the bottom of a page. The footnote was about the unique oil-filled ignition amplifiers that Auto Delta had experimented with for their long-distance racing cars in 1965. It said, in Italian, asterisk, "The initial design of the amplifier proved notoriously unreliable, as a specific internal resin potting compound would become heat-saturated after approximately 20 minutes of hard running, causing a temporary complete break in the circuit, asterisk, a temporary complete break in the circuit. After approximately 20 minutes, the ghost, it wasn't a standard coil. It wasn't a part you could order from a catalog. It was a unique experimental piece of racing technology, a flawed stepping stone on the path to victory, and it was still sitting deep in the engine bay of Alistair's TZ2. No diagnostic machine would ever find it, because no diagnostic machine knew it existed. Only a madman like Carlo Chiti would have designed it, and only a historian would know where to look for the story of its failure. The next morning, when Alistair arrived, I didn't say a word. I just handed him the open book and pointed to the footnote. He read it, then looked up at me, his blue eyes wide with dawning comprehension and utter disbelief. "My God, Eleanor," he whispered. "How in the world?" "You told me to think like a madman," I said with a triumphant smile. "The solution was as complex as the diagnosis. We couldn't replace the part with a modern amplifier. That would violate the car's originality. It would erase its soul. So I had to do the impossible. I had to recreate the flawed part, but without the flaw. I spent the next month in a deep dive of electrical engineering, sourcing modern, heat-resistant resins, and meticulously disassembling the original sealed unit without destroying it. I repotted the internal electronics, preserving every original component, but replacing the single faulty insulating compound with its modern equivalent. I sealed the unit back up, refinished its casing, and installed it back in the car. To the naked eye, it looked exactly as it had when it left the Auto Delta workshop in 1965. But inside, it was cured. The day of the final test drive was bright and clear. The air was cool. We didn't go to the track. We took the car out on Highway 1, heading south towards Big Sur. It was the ultimate test of a road car. We drove, the Alpha's engine a glorious, unfettered symphony against the backdrop of the crashing. Pacific Waves dot, we passed the 10-minute mark, then 15. My hands were tight on the wheel. At 21 minutes, I held my breath. We swept through a long, beautiful corner, the car perfectly balanced. 22 minutes came and went. The engine did not sputter. It sang that 20-5 minutes, 30, 45, an hour. The ghost was gone. I had exorcised it. We finally pulled over at a scenic viewpoint overlooking the Bixby Bridge. We got out and just looked at the car, its red paint glowing in the late afternoon sun. It was perfect. Alistair Finch was silent for a long time. He looked from the car to me, and his expression was one I had never seen before. It was a look of profound, absolute respect. The greatest experts in the world couldn't find that ghost. "Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but you did. You didn't just fix the car, you listened to it. You understood its story." He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and pulled out a long, formal envelope. He handed it to me. "This isn't about the TZ2. I drew this up last month, hoping today would come." I opened it. It wasn't an invoice or a check. It was a formal offer, a multi-year contract with a staggering salary. The title on the contract read, Chief Curator and Conservator, the Finch Collection. He was offering me my dream. Not just a job, but a position of ultimate trust, a partnership in preserving some of the most important automotive history in the world. I looked from the contract to the priceless car to the endless blue of the Pacific Ocean. A year ago, I had been humiliated by a shallow fool who thought my car was a piece of junk. Now, a king had just handed me the keys to his kingdom, and it wasn't because I had won a battle of revenge. It was because I had won a battle of wits, of passion, and of knowledge. My work had spoken for itself. "I don't know what to say, Alistair," I whispered. "Just say yes," he said with a warm smile. "My McLaren F1 has been making a funny noise on cold starts." I laughed, a full, happy, and completely unburdened laugh that seemed to be carried away by the ocean breeze. "Yes," I said, shaking his outstretched hand. "Absolutely yes." We stood there for a long time, two colleagues, two friends, two connoisseurs, watching the sun set over the ocean, the gentle ticking of the cooling engine, the only sound in the world. The ghost was gone, and my future was just beginning.